I've seen them again. The strange figures stalking the mist on sharp, stilted legs. They stare deeply into the black waters, searching for something, anything that they could liberate back to the nameless puppeteers that command them. With each sighting I freeze, fearing their gaze might turn my way and find me wanting.
Whoa! That was a bit dark. Welcome back to the Hobby Hatch, everyone. Today we're going to be making a diorama centered around a little sci-fi world I've been chewing on for a while, which I'm going to call Lament. I'll slowly be working on this setting along with my other videos as time goes on, and I'll release little tidbits of lore about the world and keep developing it here on the channel if people enjoy. For this project, I pretty much exclusively use spare bits and pieces from Warhammer kits. In this case, our long-legged friend, the Tek Prowler, was made up of a Primaris Space Marine torso from an Inceptor kit, which I de-spacemarinified to remove any obvious Warhammer symbols. The model's overall silhouette was quite square, so I rounded off to be a little more in line with the concept drawing. I popped on some legs I found in the Mechanicus pile, one from a Tauraxi kit and the other a spare servitor leg from the Iron Strider kit. You ever notice the servitor in the Iron Strider kit, they've kind of like put him in a gimp suit? You ever notice that? Maybe just me. I'll put an image up. Just have a look at it. It's kind of, yeah, I'll let you be the judge. I scavenged the head off a Sicarium Ruststalker sprue, which I attached to the body with just a piece of sprue off cut to act as the neck. I then moved on to his weapon. I wanted something ridiculously long because, why not? So starting with the Space Marine bolter arm, I added the body of a taser goad for the main body and receiver of the gun, which I then spiced up with a bolter scope, and a brass rod and suppressor for the barrel. I added a totally structurally sound, don't even worry about or look into it mate, bayonet to the front end of the barrel with brass rod and a power sword I cut to shape. I then decided this little guy was going to have a big augmented robot arm, so I made one to fit using a leftover Space Marine arm and a power fist from the epic scale Questoris Knight kit. I then added some spindly, spiky legs I made out of some leftover sprue. Once everything was glued down to the base model, I did some simple sculpting using a mixture of green stuff and milliput to fill in some of the areas that had open gaps and give him a fresh pair of pants. I then gave this little guy a polyhedron-esque shoulder pad because, well, it wouldn't be sci-fi without a big shoulder pad, would it? I gave the rifle a wrap of green stuff and rounded out the rest of the model by adding some tactical greeblies here and there to finish it off. I then moved on to the drone. For the purposes of this diorama, our drone is going to be sitting lost and abandoned in the bio wastes, with our Tek Prowler looming nearby ready to take its treasures. I started off with a ball of Super Sculpey, which I set in the oven and cut into 3 pieces. Once it was in 3 pieces, I carved out a slit for its eye, and using a ball bearing, pushed it in place and filled its innards with clay. Then, to attach the newly filled sides, I drilled and ran a rod through the centerpiece. We'll eventually be gluing the sides we cut off back onto the rod after we add in all the other details. I used my Dremel and an end mill carving bit to clear up some of the space for the rocket pods and other weapons. I then greelied up the gap with weapons and a few other bits and bobs from an Adeptus Mechanicus Dune Rider kit, and used some Milliput to fill in some of the areas that were a little bit too bare. All that was left was to add the tail, which I did with a little bit more clay and some green stuff, followed by some greeblies. After all that, I got stuck into the painting. I base coated the entire model with Mornfang Brown, which I then sprayed with a nice bright verdigris colour. The camera had a hard time picking up the blue tint of this paint, so it's looking pretty white at the moment, but trust me, it's blue, I swear. I then used a brush to set in more opaque highlights and to reinforce and blend the brown back into the shadows. Painted on a snazzy little pair of board shorts, because you're going to need them wading around in all that toxic sludge. I then moved on to the metallics. I decided to do a non-metallic metal silver for all these sections, so to achieve that effect I coated everything in a dark grey, and then moved up through to light grey and finally a white highlight. I also painted the secondary reflections brown to give off the effect that it's reflecting the ground beneath him. With all the metal done, all that was left to do was paint the accessories. Ah yes, a very nice Gucci leather wrap for your rifle. Oh, I didn't realise you had the new Samsung smart screen back. That must have cost you a fortune. I then moved on to painting the drone. All very similar techniques, so I won't bore you with going over them a second time, but here it is all finished. I then whipped out my very technical blueprints and began mocking up how this diorama was going to be laid out. Long story short, there's going to be some rocks and a little path that adventurers making their way through the biowaste would use to stop them from having to wade through all the toxic sludge. I used cork for all the rocks, and once they were all set in place, I textured and sealed the foam and rocks with Vallejo texture paste. I then made a little footbridge out of coffee stir sticks and some little craft dowel I got from the hardware store. I then made this little pole because, it seemed cool at the time. After everything was glued down, I added different sizes of gravel and grout to vary up some of the ground textures. Once everything was dry, I gave everything a coat of black spray primer and painted the dirt colour. I then painted the wood a nice dark brown colour. To make it look a little sickly, I mixed in a little bit of green and washed it all over. I then made sure to highlight it with Mornfang brown. I painted the little radio parts on the pylon with the same non-metallic metal technique as before, and moved on to magic in a bottle. Dirty down moss. I absolutely slathered all of the wood and pretty much everything else with this stuff. If you have a bottle of your own, you'll know how much fun this stuff is to use. I can only recommend you slather it on thick if you want to get the most variance colour when it dries. With the layer of moss dry, I moved on to adding some flock. This was looking a little bit too bright green for my liking, so I dabbed some more moss effect on in certain areas to tie everything together. I then added our characters to the scene. The general gist is that our horrifying techno-abomination has found himself the ultimate prize in the bile wastes, a well-preserved, albeit slightly overgrown tadpole drone. I then added some grassy tufts to the terrain and to the drone to tie it into the scene. Once their glue had dried, it was onto the resin pour. To make a mould, I used masking tape, reinforced with some heavy-duty double-sided tape to give it some rigidity. To make sure the resin wasn't just going to leak straight down the sides and out under the tape, I sealed the bottom surface, including the edges up against the tape, with acrylic water effects from Vallejo. Once that was dry, I mixed up some resin, colouring it with some dark green alcohol inks and brown acrylic paint.
A few inches later.
Once it had cured, I removed the tape and cleaned up the sides with some sandpaper and a coat of gloss varnish. To give the surface of the water a bit more variation to stop it being so flat, I dabbed on some gloss Mod Podge. I then added some duckweed with a dropper bottle and some green paint. And lastly, I made a little black wooden border to cover up the foam, and after sliding it on, it was finally onto the Glamour Shots.
Stay calm.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This one took me a little while to make and shortened down into a reasonable video length, so if you're still here all the way to the end, thank you for sticking around. Those of you following me on Instagram would have seen updates of this project in the making, but if you didn't get to see them and would like to, consider heading over to my Instagram. The link is, as always, in the description. I've already started working on my next project, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, if you have the hobby fever, consider checking out one of these videos. YouTube ensures me it's the best one for you. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.